My name is Willow, and I'm 25 now, looking back at the day my world turned upside down. It was my 18th birthday, and I sat on the curb outside my childhood home, my suitcase beside me, the air biting my skin. My stepfather's words echoed, "You're not my kid. Get out." The house I'd known my whole life was locked to me, my mother's silence cutting deeper than his cruelty. But the next day, I uncovered a secret that changed everything. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? Share where you're watching from in the comments, and if this hits home, please like and subscribe to hear how I fought back. I woke up to the sound of Richard's boots stomping across the hardwood floor. It was barely 6 in the morning, my 18th birthday, and the Ohio sky outside my window was still gray. I'm Willow, 25 now, but back then, I was just a kid with dreams bigger than this small town could hold. I'd graduated high school a month ago, saved every penny from my diner job for community college. I thought I had time to figure things out to stay in the house I'd always called home. But Richard had other plans. His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Willow, get up. Pack your stuff. You're out by noon." I sat up in bed, my heart racing, thinking it was some cruel joke. I pulled on a sweater, my hands shaking, and found him in the kitchen, arms crossed, his face hard as stone. Diane, my mother, was there too, her eyes fixed on a pile of laundry she was folding with mechanical precision. She didn't look at me, not once. "Richard, what's going on?" I asked, my voice small, hoping I'd misheard. He leaned forward, his breath sour with coffee. "You're 18 now. You're not my kid, and I'm not running a hotel. You've been a burden long enough." His words hit like a slap, each one sinking deeper. I glanced at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything. She just kept folding her hands, trembling slightly, a towel bunched tight in her fists. "I'm not a burden," I said, my throat tightening. "I work at the diner. I'm starting college in the fall. I'll pay rent, whatever you want." My voice cracked, but I held his gaze, searching for a crack in his resolve. He just snorted, shaking his head like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You think a few bucks from slinging hash browns makes you special? Pack up, Willow." "I'm done." I turned to my mother, my chest aching. "Mom, please. This is my home." Her lips parted, but no words came. She folded another shirt, her knuckles white. Richard's shadow loomed over the table, and I saw her flinch just a flicker before she turned away. That silence was worse than his words. It was like she'd erased me, like the years we'd spent together in this house meant nothing. Sadie, my half-sister, hovered in the hallway, her wide eyes darting between us. She was 15, caught in the crossfire, her school bag slung over one shoulder. I wanted to reach for her to tell her I'd fix this, but Richard snapped, "Sadie, get to school. Now." She hesitated, her fingers twisting the strap of her bag, then slipped out the back door without a word. I felt her absence like a weight, another piece of my family slipping away. I stood there, rooted to the kitchen floor, the clock ticking above the stove. This was the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, in the driveway where my father had carved my initials into the oak tree out back before he died. I was 10 when he passed, and Richard came into our lives a year later, filling the space my father left with his loud voice and heavy hands. I'd tried to make it work to keep the peace for my mother's sake, but now I saw it clearly. I'd been living on borrowed time. I went back to my room, my legs heavy, and opened my closet. My clothes were neatly hung, my books stacked on a shelf I'd built myself. I pulled out a duffel bag, my fingers brushing against something tucked behind a shoebox. It was a birthday card I'd made last night, a silly thing I'd drawn for myself, knowing no one else would bother. Inside, I'd written a note to my father: "I'll make you proud." I stuffed it into my pocket, my eyes burning, and started packing. Every shirt I folded felt like a surrender. I kept glancing at the door, hoping my mother would come in, tell me this was a mistake, that she'd fight for me. But the house stayed quiet, except for Richard's muttering in the kitchen about bills and space. I zipped up the bag, my hands trembling, and looked around my room one last time. The walls were still covered with my sketches, dreams of a future I thought I'd build here. Now I wasn't so sure. I carried the bag downstairs, Richard watching me like a hawk. "You're making the right choice," he said, as if I had one. I wanted to scream to tell him this was my home, not his, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I looked at my mother, still folding laundry, her back to me. "Mom," I said softly, "one last plea." She paused, her shoulders stiff, then kept folding. That was when I knew I was on my own. I stepped out the front door, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, the morning air sharp against my face. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath. I'm Willow, 25 now, but at 18, I was just a kid standing on the edge of everything I knew, watching it slip away. The house behind me, with its chipped blue paint and creaky porch, felt like a stranger now. I started walking toward the bus stop, my sneakers scuffing the cracked sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going. My plan had been to stay home, save money, start college. Now, with $50 in my pocket and no one to call family, the future was a blank page. I thought about Harper, my best friend since middle school. She was at college in Columbus, chasing her journalism degree. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stiff from the cold, and dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Willow, hey, happy birthday." Her voice was bright, but I could hear the rush of a lecture hall in the background. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Harper, I need help. Richard kicked me out. I'm at the bus stop with nowhere to go." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, soft and urgent. "What? Why would he do that? Are you okay?" I told her everything, the words spilling out. Richard's ultimatum, my mother's silence, Sadie's helpless look. Harper listened, her breath sharp on the other end. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm stuck here until the weekend, but I'll figure something out. Can you crash somewhere for a couple days?" I wanted to say yes, but the truth was, I had no one else. My father's family was long gone, and my mother's friends were loyal to Richard. I mumbled something about figuring it out, hung up, and sat on the bus stop bench, the metal cold through my jeans. The town felt smaller than ever, every passing car a reminder of how exposed I was. I pulled my jacket tighter, my mind racing. I'd always thought family was supposed to be your anchor, but mine had cut me loose without a word. A familiar pickup truck slowed down as it passed. It was Margaret, the elderly neighbor who lived 2 houses down. Her gray hair was tucked under a knit cap, and her eyes softened when she saw me. She rolled down her window. "Willow, honey, what's wrong? You look lost." I hesitated, shame creeping up my neck, but her kindness cracked something open. "Richard kicked me out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, her lips tightening. "Your dad would have never let this happen. He was a good man, always talking about you." Her words stung stirring memories of my father teaching me to hammer nails in the backyard, promising I'd always have a home. I nodded, unable to speak, and she drove off, promising to check on me later. I boarded the next bus, heading nowhere specific, just away. The driver, a tired-looking man named Carl, gave me a sympathetic nod as I paid with crumpled bills. The bus smelled of stale coffee and vinyl, and I took a seat near the back, staring out the window at the familiar streets. The diner where I worked flashed by its neon sign flickering. I thought about my shifts there, the greasy aprons, the tips I'd saved in a jar under my bed. It wasn't much, but it was mine-proof. I wasn't the burden Richard claimed. As the bus rattled along, I overheard voices from the house drifting through my memory. Not from this morning, but last night when I'd been half asleep. Richard's low growl talking to my mother in the living room. Something about a will, about needing to act fast. I hadn't thought much of it then, too. Caught up in birthday plans. But now it gnawed at me. What were they hiding? Why was Richard so eager to push me out? I pulled the birthday card from my pocket, the one I'd made for myself, and traced the words I'd written to my father. "I'll make you proud." But how could I, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to? The bus stopped near the edge of town, and I got off, my bag heavier than before. The motel up the road was my only option, a rundown place with flickering lights and a clerk who barely looked up. I paid for a night, my savings dwindling, and stepped into a room that smelled of mildew. The walls were thin, the voices of other guests seeping through, arguing about money and broken promises. I sat on the sagging bed, my father's photo in my hands, his smile steady and warm. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing: Richard's cruelty wasn't the end of my story. Something was off, something bigger than me, and I was going to find out what. Morning came too fast, the motel room's thin curtains doing little to block the pale Ohio light. I'm Willow, 25 now, but that night in the motel at 18, I felt like the world was caving in. The room was dim, the fluorescent light buzzing like a trapped fly. I sat on the lumpy mattress, my father's photo propped against the pillow, his smile a faint anchor in the storm of my thoughts. The walls were so thin I could hear a couple arguing next door, their voices sharp with accusations. It made my own anger flare hot and raw as I replayed Richard's words from that morning. "You're not my kid. A burden." Every syllable was a knife, and my mother's silence twisted it deeper. I pulled out my phone, my hands unsteady, and called her. Maybe she'd explain, maybe she'd fight for me now that Richard wasn't looming over her. The line rang twice before she picked up. "Willow." She said, her voice low like she was hiding. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my throat tight. "Why didn't you stop him?" There was a long pause, then a sigh. "It's for the best," she said, and hung up. I stared at the phone, my chest burning. For the best? She'd chosen him over me, her own daughter, without even a fight. I paced the room, the carpet sticky under my sneakers. Memories of Richard flooded back, not just from today, but from years of him chipping away at me. When I was 12, he'd scoffed at my dream of studying art, saying, "You'll never make a dime drawing pictures." At 15, when I got my first job at the diner, he'd called it pocket change, not worth his respect. I'd swallowed it all, thinking I could prove him wrong, that my mother would see me. But now, alone in this dingy motel, I wondered if I'd been wrong about everything. Had I done something to make them hate me? Was I really the burden he said I was? My phone buzzed, a text from Sadie. "Don't hate Mom," it said. I wanted to scream. Hate her, I didn't know what I felt, anger, sure, but also this hollow ache like part of me was missing. Sadie was caught in the middle, too young to stand up to Richard, too loyal to our mother to break free. I typed back, "I don't," but my fingers froze before sending. I wasn't sure it was true. I dug through my duffel bag, desperate for something to ground me, and found an old journal I'd kept at 16. The pages were filled with sketches and notes, dreams of a life beyond this town. One entry stopped me cold. A memory of my father sitting on the porch promising me the house one day. "You'll always have a place, Willow," he'd said, his voice warm like summer. I'd believed him, but now it felt like a lie. Richard had taken that promise and crushed it, and my mother had let him. A knock at the door startled me. It was Margaret, my neighbor, holding a thermos of soup, her face creased with worry. "I brought you something warm," she said, stepping inside. The smell of chicken broth filled the room, comforting, but not enough to dull the pain. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tight. I told her what happened, my voice breaking as I described my mother's silence. Margaret shook her head. "Your father, Henry. He planned for you," she said. "Did you know he had a lawyer? A man named Larson handled his estate. There's things you should look into, Willow." Her words lit a spark, but it was quickly drowned by anger. Why hadn't anyone told me? Why had my mother kept me in the dark? I thanked Margaret, my voice flat, and she left, promising to check in tomorrow. I lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind spinning. Richard's cruelty wasn't new, but my mother's betrayal was a fresh wound. She'd always been quiet, worn down by grief since my father died, but I thought she loved me. Now I wasn't sure. The soup sat untouched on the nightstand, the thermos a small kindness in a world that felt increasingly cruel. I clutched my journal, my father's words echoing. "You'll always have a place." But where was my place now? Morning came too fast, the motel room's thin curtains doing little to block the pale Ohio light. I dragged myself to the bus stop, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, heading to the diner where I worked. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and my stomach churned not from hunger, but from the weight of yesterday. I needed work, extra shifts, anything to keep me afloat. The diner was busy, the clatter of plates and coffee orders filling the air. I tied on my apron, hoping the routine would steady me. Carla, my boss, gave me a quick hug, her eyes soft with pity. "Business is slow, kid," she said, "but I'll see what I can do about extra hours." I nodded grateful, but the pity stung. I didn't want to be the girl everyone felt sorry for. I was wiping down tables when Lucas, a coworker with a smirk that never quit, leaned in close. "Heard you got kicked out," he said loud enough for the line cook to glance over. "Tough break, princess." His words were a jab, and I felt my face burn as customers turned to stare. I kept my head down, scrubbing a ketchup stain harder than I needed to. The gossip was spreading. I could feel it like a current running through the diner. Small towns talk, and mine was no different. By noon, I caught 2 regulars whispering, their eyes darting to me. "Poor thing," one said. "Her stepdad always was trouble," said the other. I wanted to disappear, to scream that I wasn't poor, anything, but my throat was too tight to speak. I took my break outside, the air damp and cool. I checked my phone, hoping for a text from Sadie, something to bridge the gap between us. Nothing. I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over Harper's name, but I didn't call. She was miles away, living a life I'd dreamed of. I felt smaller than ever, like the world was moving on without me. Then I saw him, Richard, across the street at the grocery store, laughing with a buddy, his voice carrying over the parking lot. He looked untouched, like throwing me out was just another Tuesday. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. How could he stand there so smug while I was barely holding on? I went back inside my shift, dragging on. Every tip I pocketed felt like a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. I thought about my father's journal, the promise of a home, and how Richard had stolen that from me. My mother's face flashed in my mind, her eyes avoiding mine as she folded that endless pile of laundry. Why hadn't she fought for me? Was I that easy to let go? As I clocked out, my phone buzzed. A text from Sadie Richards, "Selling your stuff online. Your desk, your books, everything." My stomach dropped. That desk was where I'd drawn my first sketches, where I'd studied for finals, dreaming of a future. I texted back, "Why didn't you stop him?" Her reply came fast. "I tried. He won't listen. I'm sorry." Sorry wasn't enough. I wanted to march back to the house, demand my things, but the thought of facing Richard again made my chest tighten. I caught the bus back to the motel, my mind a tangle of anger and loss. In my bag, I found the letter I'd discovered in my father's photo frame, still sealed, marked "Open on your 18th." My hands shook as I held it, too afraid to break the seal. What could it say that would change this? I tucked it back into my bag, my heart pounding. Richard's laughter from the parking lot echoed in my head, and Sadie's text burned behind my eyes. My life was being dismantled piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. But that letter and Margaret's words about a lawyer lingered like a faint pulse. Something was coming, something I couldn't yet see, and it scared me as much as it gave me hope. I'm Willow, 25 now. But at 18, standing in Mr. Larson's office, my world was splitting open. It was the day after my birthday, and I stood outside a small law office in town, clutching my father's sealed letter like a lifeline. The building was old, its brick facade, crumbling papers stacked high on every desk inside. Margaret's words from the motel had pushed me here, her mention of Mr. Larson, my father's lawyer, ringing in my ears. I needed answers, something to make sense of why Richard had thrown me out, why my mother had let him. I stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of ink and dust. Mr. Larson was a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, his office a maze of folders and yellowed documents. He looked up surprised when I said my name. "Willow." He said, his voice soft but serious. "I was wondering when you'd come." My stomach twisted. He gestured to a chair, and I sat, my hands sweaty, the letter still unopened in my lap. I told him about yesterday, how Richard had kicked me out, how my mother stood by silent. My voice shook as I described the bus stop, the motel, Sadie's text about my things being sold. Mr. Larson listened, his face unreadable, then leaned back and pulled a file from a drawer. Your father Henry left something for you, he said. I've been waiting to give it to you since you turned 18. He slid a thick envelope across the desk marked with my father's handwriting for Willow on her 18th birthday. My breath caught. I opened the envelope, my fingers clumsy, and found a legal document pages stapled together titled, Last Will and Testament. My eyes scanned the words, but they didn't make sense at first. Mr. Larson spoke, his voice steady. Your father left the house to you, Willow. Effective on your 18th birthday. Richard and Diane were only caretakers allowed to live there until you came of age. My heart stopped. The house. My house. The one I'd been thrown out of. He went on his words like a tidal wave. Richard knew about the will. He's been trying to claim ownership, forging papers to make it look like your father left the house to him and your mother. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Forging papers Richard had planned, this had lied to my mother, to me, to everyone. The room spun and I gripped the chair, trying to anchor myself. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Larson sighed. Your mother was grieving when your father died. Richard convinced her it was too complicated for you to know. She trusted him. I felt sick, my anger at Richard now laced with something sharper, something that burned my throat. My mother had known she'd let him lie, let him take my home. I thought of her folding laundry, her silence, and realized it wasn't just weakness, it was complicity. Mr. Larson pulled out a small USB drive. Your father recorded something for you, he said. I want you to see it. He plugged it into an old laptop, and my father's face appeared on the screen. His eyes warm, just as I remembered. Willow, my girl, he said, his voice cracking through the speakers. If you're watching this, you're 18 and the house is yours. I want you to build a life there, a strong one, like you've always been. My eyes stung, tears spilling over. He'd planned for me, believed in me, and Richard had stolen that. I clutched the letter, its weight heavier now, the truth sinking in. My home wasn't gone. It was mine, and Richard had tried to erase my father's last gift to me. My phone buzzed, snapping me back. It was Sadie, her voice frantic when I answered. Willow, Richard's meeting with a realtor today. He's selling the house, saying it's his. I don't know what to do. My heart pounded, the room closing in. Selling my house. My father's house. The betrayal was a physical ache, my chest tight with rage and disbelief. I looked at Mr. Larson, his eyes steady but urgent. We can stop this, he said, but we need to act fast. I nodded, my hands trembling, the truth still sinking in, tearing me apart. I'm Willow, 25 now, but at 18, standing in Mr. Larson's office, my world was splitting open. Sadie's words echoed in my head, Richard selling my house. My father's house. Like it was nothing. I thanked Mr. Larson, my voice hollow, and stumbled out into the afternoon heat, the will and USB drive clutched tight in my bag. I needed to see Richard, to confront him, to make him face what he'd done. My legs carried me to the house. My home, the only place I'd ever felt safe. The porch steps creaked under my weight, each one a memory of summers with my father, his laughter filling the air. I knocked my knuckles raw, and Richard opened the door, his eyes narrowing. What do you want? He barked, blocking the doorway. I held up the will, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. This says the house is mine, I said. You lied. You forged papers. His face didn't change, but a cold laugh escaped him. You think a piece of paper means anything? No judge will side with a kid like you over me. My mother appeared behind him, her face, pale eyes darting like a trapped animal. Willow, please, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Just go. It's too complicated. Complicated? I snapped, my voice rising. You knew Dad left me the house and you let him throw me out. She flinched, her hands twisting a dish rag, but said nothing. Sadie stood in the living room, her school bag at her feet, her eyes wide with fear. Willow, don't, she whispered, but I couldn't stop. The truth was out and it burned. Richard stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the light. You're out of your depth, he said. Go back to your motel and stay out of our lives. I'll have the cops drag you out if I have to. My heart pounded, rage mixing with a sickening sense of betrayal. My mother's silence was louder than his threats. Her refusal to meet my eyes a confirmation of everything I feared. She'd chosen him again even now. I heard a car pull up, and a man in a suit stepped out, a realtor, his clipboard gleaming in the sun. Richard waved him over, his voice smooth. "Just showing the place," he said, like I wasn't standing there, like I didn't exist. The realtor glanced at me, confused, but didn't ask questions. My throat closed up, the world tilting. They were moving forward, erasing my father's legacy, my home, right in front of me. Sadie grabbed my arm, her voice low. "I didn't know about the will," she said, tears in her eyes. "I swear. But Mom's scared Willow. He's got her believing she'll lose everything." I pulled away, my chest tight. "And what about me?" I asked. "What about what I've lost?" She looked down. No answer, and I felt the last thread of family snap. I turned to leave, Richard's laugh following me down the steps, sharp and cruel. As I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A notification from a local Facebook group posted by Lucas, that coworker with the permanent smirk. It was a photo of me standing on the porch, arguing with Richard, captioned, "Ungrateful kid tries to steal family home." Comments piled up, neighbors I'd known my whole life calling me selfish, a troublemaker. My face burned, the public shame hitting like a wave. The town was turning on me, believing Richard's lies, and my mother stood by, letting it happen. I clutched my bag, the will inside it, my only proof, but it felt useless against the weight of their betrayal. I was alone, exposed, and the ground beneath me was crumbling. I'm Willow, 25 now, but at 18 standing on that sidewalk with Richard's laughter ringing in my ears and Lucas's cruel post burning my phone screen, I felt like I'd been gutted. My house stood behind me, its windows dark, the realtor's car still parked out front. My father's will was in my bag, its pages heavy with a truth I could barely process. I walked away, my legs unsteady, the weight of the town's judgment pressing down. But something shifted inside me, a spark of defiance flickering through the hurt. I wasn't done yet. I headed to the town library, a squat brick building with tall windows letting in slants of morning light. The air inside smelled of old books and polished wood, a quiet that felt like a reprieve. I set my bag down at a corner table, the will and USB drive beside me, and opened a computer. I needed to understand what I was up against, what it meant to own a house Richard was trying to steal. My fingers trembled as I typed "Property Laws, Ohio" into the search bar, my heart still racing from the confrontation. The screen filled with legal jargon, but I forced myself to read, jotting notes on a scrap of paper. Words like injunction and title dispute swam in front of me, unfamiliar but urgent. I wasn't a lawyer, wasn't even in college yet, but I knew I couldn't let Richard win. My father's voice from that video, warm and steady, echoed in my mind. Build a life, Willow. I owed him that much. A librarian. Tessa noticed me struggling. She was in her 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense braid. "Need help?" she asked, glancing at my notes. I hesitated, then told her everything, the will, Richard's forgery, the realtor. Her face hardened as I spoke, and when I finished, she pulled up a chair. "My family lost our farm to a bad deal," she said. "I learned the hard way how to fight for what's yours. I can help you find a pro bono lawyer." My breath caught. "A lawyer, for free." She nodded, already pulling up a contact on her phone. Tessa called a friend, a young attorney named Rachel, who agreed to meet me that afternoon. I spent the next hour printing copies of the will and downloading my father's video onto a library computer, my hands steadier with each click. Tessa showed me how to file for an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house. Her voice calm but firm. "You're not alone in this," she said. I wanted to believe her, but the sting of my mother's silence and Sadie's torn loyalty made it hard. Rachel met me in a small coffee shop across from the library, her briefcase stuffed with papers. She was all business, her dark hair pulled back, but her smile was warm. I laid out the will and told her about Richard's threats, the realtor, the forged papers. She listened, taking notes, her pen moving fast. "This is fraud," she said plainly. "We can stop him, but it'll be a fight. He's banking on you giving up." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. Giving up wasn't an option, not anymore. We drafted the injunction paperwork right there, my hands shaking as I signed my name. Rachel explained it would freeze any sale until a judge could review the will. "It's a start," she said, "but Richard won't go quietly." I nodded, my jaw tight. I didn't expect him to. As we worked, a text came from Sadie. "Mom's crying all the time. Richard's telling everyone you're lying." My stomach twisted, but I didn't reply. I couldn't let their chaos pull me under. Walking out of the coffee shop, the injunction papers in my bag, I felt a new strength building, like a fire kindling in my chest. The town might think I was a selfish kid, but I had my father's will, his voice, his belief in me. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the life he wanted me to have. Rachel's number was saved in my phone, Tessa's encouragement in my heart. I was moving forward step by shaky step, and nothing Richard did could stop me now. I'm Willow, 25 now, but at 18, standing outside that coffee shop with Rachel's injunction papers in my bag, I felt a shift, like I was finally gripping the reins of my own life. The Ohio sky was overcast, the air thick with the threat of a storm, but I walked with purpose toward the courthouse, my sneakers steady on the pavement. The town's whispers followed me, neighbors' glances, Lucas's cruel posts still circulating, but I held my head high. My father's voice from that video looped in my mind. "Build a life, Willow." I was starting to. The courthouse was a gray stone building, its steps worn smooth by years of footsteps. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of wax and old paper. Rachel led me to a clerk's desk, where we filed the injunction, the stamp on the paper sounding final like a gavel in my chest. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, glanced at me. "You're young for this," she said, not unkindly. I nodded, my throat tight. "I don't have a choice," I said. She gave a small smile, like she understood more than she let on. Rachel prepped me for the hearing set for the next morning. "Bring everything," she said. "The will, the video, any proof of your father's intent." I spent the evening back at the library, Tessa letting me stay past closing. I printed more copies of the will, organized my notes, and watched my father's video again, his words grounding me. "You're strong, Willow," he'd said, his eyes bright even through the screen. I clung to that, letting it fuel me through the fear. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse, my stomach in knots. I'd found my father's old watch in my bag, its leather strap worn but warm against my wrist. I put it on the ticking steady like his heartbeat. It wasn't much, but it felt like he was with me. Rachel arrived, her briefcase clicking shut, and we walked in together. The courtroom was small, the wooden benches hard under me. Richard and my mother were already there, sitting stiffly, Richard's jaw set, my mother's hands folded tightly in her lap. The judge, an older man with deep lines on his face, called the case. Rachel stood presenting the injunction, her voice clear as she laid out the will and Richard's forgery. I stood when it was my turn, my knees shaking but my voice steady. "This house was my father's gift to me," I said, holding up the will. "He wanted me to have a future. Richard's trying to take that away." I played the video, my father's voice filling the room, calm and sure. The judge watched, his expression unreadable. Richard's lawyer, a slick man with a too-tight tie, stood up, his voice dripping with confidence. "My client has been the primary caretaker of the property," he said. "This girl is 18 with no means to maintain it. The will is questionable, possibly altered." I felt my face burn the accusation like a slap. Questionable. My father's words. His face on that screen were as real as anything I'd ever known. I wanted to shout to make them see, but Rachel touched my arm, her eyes saying, "Stay calm." The judge asked me to speak again. I stood, my father's watch heavy on my wrist. "I'm not just fighting for a house," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm fighting for what my father believed in me." I looked at Richard, his eyes cold, and my mother, her gaze fixed on the floor. I wasn't sure if they heard me, but I felt the words settle inside, solid and true. As we left the courtroom, the injunction still pending, I caught sight of Margaret outside, standing with two neighbors I'd known since I was a kid. They held signs, "Justice for Willow," Henry's girl. My chest tightened, not with anger but with something new, a quiet strength growing like a root. I met Margaret's eyes, her nod steady, and for the first time I didn't feel alone. I slipped my hand into my pocket, touching the folded will, and walked down the steps, my father's watch ticking softly against my skin. I'm Willow 25 now, but at 18, standing on the courthouse steps, I felt the weight of my actions settle like dust after a storm. The judge's ruling came down that afternoon. The house was mine, confirmed by my father's will, and Richard had 30 days to vacate. The Ohio rain started as I walked away, a light drizzle soaking my jacket, Rachel by my side, her face calm but triumphant. "You did it," she said, but I didn't feel like celebrating. The victory was real, but it came with a cost I hadn't expected. I stood under the courthouse awning, watching the rain streak the pavement. Margaret and her neighbors approached their signs soggy, but their smiles warm. "You're your father's daughter," Margaret said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, my throat tight, grateful for their support, but haunted by what came next. My mother's face in the courtroom flashed in my mind, pale, crumpled like she'd been broken. She'd grabbed my arm as we left, her voice a whisper. "I'm sorry, Willow," she said, tears spilling. It was Richard. I didn't know what to do. Her words felt like a plea, but they landed like stones, heavy and too late. Sadie was waiting outside, her hoodie damp, her eyes red. She ran to me, wrapping her arms around me, her voice muffled. "I didn't know it was yours," she said. "I swear I didn't. But Mom's a mess. She thinks she's lost everything." I held her, my heart splitting. Sadie was caught between us, only 15, too young to carry this weight. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words stuck. My mother's apology echoed, and I wondered if I could ever trust her again. The house was mine, but what about the family I'd lost, back at the motel? I sat on the bed, the injunction papers spread out beside me. The room felt smaller now, the air stale, but the reality of the ruling was sinking in. I owned the house, my father's gift, his belief in me. But the victory felt hollow. I'd fought for what was mine, but I'd torn open wounds I didn't know how to heal. My phone buzzed with a text from Carla at the diner, heard about the hearing. "Proud of you, kid. Come back when you're ready." It was kind, but it didn't erase the ache. I walked to the window, the rain louder now, tapping the glass like a heartbeat. I thought about my mother, her life tangled with Richard's for years. Had she known about the forgery all along, or was she just too weak to fight him? And Sadie, what did this mean for her? She was still living in that house under Richard's thumb, and I couldn't shake the guilt of leaving her there even for a moment. The judge's ruling gave me power, but it also left me stranded in a new kind of loneliness. A knock came at the door. It was Lucas, of all people, his hair wet, his usual smirk gone. "I saw your post got taken down," he said, shifting awkwardly. "I shouldn't have done that. I was jealous, okay? You've got guts." I stared at him, stunned. An apology from Lucas was the last thing I expected, but it didn't undo the damage. "Thanks," I said, my voice flat, and closed the door. His words lingered, a small crack in the town's judgment, but they couldn't fix the bigger fracture: my family, my home, my sense of belonging. I sat back down, staring at the papers, my father's watch still ticking on my wrist. The house was mine, but it didn't feel like home anymore. My mother's tears, Sadie's hug, Richard's cold stare, they swirled in my mind, a storm I couldn't escape. I'd won the fight, but at what cost? The rain kept falling, and I stood frozen, the weight of my choice pressing down, no answers in sight. I'm Willow 25 now, but at 18, the courthouse victory left me standing in a rain-soaked world that felt more fragile than ever. I moved back into the house the next day, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the key cold in my hand. The place was quiet. Too quiet, the air heavy with the absence of life. Richard had left that morning, his truck loaded with boxes, his face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this," he'd spat. As he drove off, his words lingering like a bruise. My mother was gone too, staying with her sister across town, leaving Sadie with me for now. I stepped inside, the hardwood floors creaking under my weight. The living room felt foreign, stripped of my things, the walls bare where my sketches used to hang. Sadie trailed behind, her eyes downcast, clutching a backpack. "I'm staying with you, right?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, but the question hung between us unanswered. She was 15, caught in a tug of war between me and our mother, and I didn't know how to protect her without breaking something else. I set my bag down in my old room now, just a mattress and a cracked mirror. The emptiness hit hard, like the house itself was grieving. I wandered to the garage where my father's toolbox sat in a corner, dusty but untouched. I opened it expecting tools, but found a folded note tucked inside his handwriting, faint but clear. "The house is your strength, Willow." My throat tightened. He'd known I'd need this, but standing here I felt more lost than strong. Sadie hovered nearby, her silence louder than words. I asked her to sit, hoping to bridge the gap. She told me about our mother, how she'd stopped eating, how she'd cry at night when she thought no one heard. "She's scared of being alone," Sadie said, her voice breaking. I wanted to feel sorry, but all I could see was her standing by while Richard threw me out. "I don't know if I can forgive her," I said, my words sharper than I meant. Sadie's face fell and she looked away, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. Outside the neighborhood was quiet, but I felt eyes on me. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Carter, watched from her porch, her lips tight. She'd been one of the ones commenting on Lucas's post, calling me ungrateful. Now, with the house mine, her gaze was different, wary, like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. I wanted to shout that I was still me, still Henry's daughter, but I stayed silent, my energy drained. My phone buzzed with a message from Harper, who'd heard about the ruling. "I'm coming home this weekend," she wrote. "We'll fix up the place together." It was a lifeline, but it didn't erase the ache of standing in a house that felt like a shell. I walked to the kitchen where my mother's coffee mug still sat on the counter, half full, like she'd be back any minute. I poured it out, the liquid swirling down the drain, and felt a pang of guilt. Was I the one tearing us apart? Sadie sat on the couch, sketching in a notebook, her pencil moving fast. I watched her, wondering if she blamed me for this mess. The house was mine, but it came with a price: my mother's absence, Sadie's uncertainty, the town's sidelong glances. I'd fought for my father's legacy, but now I stood in its echo, surrounded by walls that held too many ghosts. I sank to the floor, my back against the counter, the note from my father's toolbox in my hand. The strength he'd promised felt out of reach, and all I could do was sit there, the quiet swallowing me whole. I'm Willow, 25 now, but at 18, with the house finally mine, I stood in its quiet rooms, trying to make them feel like home again. It was spring, the Ohio air soft with the scent of blooming lilacs outside. I'd started painting the walls a pale blue I'd picked out myself, the kind my father would have liked. Each stroke of the roller felt like a small reclaiming, a way to cover the scars of the past months. Sadie was there too, her laughter echoing as she helped sand the old dining table, her hands dusted with sawdust. The house was coming alive, but it was a slow process, like coaxing a wounded thing back to health. I'd wake early before the sun and walk the rooms, my bare feet cool against the floorboards. The kitchen window overlooked the backyard where I'd begun a garden: tomatoes, basil, a few marigolds for color. I'd never gardened before, but the act of digging, of planting something with the hope it would grow, felt like a promise I was making to myself. Sadie and I worked side by side most days, her chatter filling the silence. She talked about school, her art projects, how she'd started drawing flowers inspired by the garden. But sometimes her voice would dip, and she'd mention our mother. "She called yesterday," Sadie said one afternoon, wiping paint from her cheek. "She wants to talk, Willow." I don't know what to tell her. I paused, my roller dripping blue, and looked at her. Sadie's eyes were searching, caught between hope and fear, and I knew she wanted us to be a family again. I wanted that too, but the hurt was still there, a quiet ache beneath my ribs. I set the roller down and sat on the drop cloth, the smell of paint sharp in the air. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said, my voice low. "She's sorry, but sorry doesn't erase what happened." Sadie nodded, her fingers tracing the grain of the table. "She's afraid of being alone," she said. "I think she's been afraid her whole life." Her words hit me not with anger, but with a strange clarity. My mother had always been fragile, leaning on Richard to fill the void my father left. I judged her for it, but maybe I hadn't seen her fully. Later that day, I walked to the backyard, a spade in hand, and started planting more seeds. The soil was cool, yielding under my fingers, and I thought about my father, how he'd loved this yard, how he'd taught me to love it too. I'd found a small box buried near the oak tree a few days ago, a time capsule we'd made when I was 8. Inside was a letter, his handwriting looping and sure. "Willow, you're my brave girl. Dream big always." I'd cried reading it, but not out of sadness, out of gratitude for the piece of him I still had. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and looked at the house. The new paint caught the light, making it look alive again. Sadie joined me, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She didn't say anything, just stood close, her shoulder brushing mine. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet settling inside. Not peace exactly, but a step toward it. The garden was small, the paint still wet, but they were mine, choices I'd made. I breathed in the spring air, letting it fill my lungs, and felt the weight of the past loosen just a little. I'm Willow, 25 now, and as I sit in this house I fought for, I'm learning what it means to rebuild not just walls, but myself. The Ohio summer hums outside, the air thick with honeysuckle and the buzz of cicadas. The walls are bright with my paint, the floors polished to a soft shine. I walk through the rooms barefoot, the wood cool under my feet, and smile at the small touches I've added: a shelf of books, a vase of wildflowers, a quilt I found at a thrift store. It's not perfect, but it's home. Mornings start early now. I'm up before dawn, brewing coffee in the kitchen, the same one where I once stood pleading with my mother. I'm studying law part-time at the community college. My father's dream for me taking shape in late-night study sessions. My laptop sits on the dining table, surrounded by notebooks filled with my handwriting, each page a step towards something bigger. I don't know where it'll lead, but I'm learning to trust the process, to trust myself. Sadie lives with me, half the time her room a burst of color with her art pinned to the walls. She's 16 now, her sketches bolder, her laugh brighter. We cook dinner together some nights, bumping elbows in the small kitchen, trading stories about school and dreams. She's started painting murals, flowers and vines curling across canvases, and I see my father in her creativity, his spark alive in her. Our mother visits sometimes, her steps cautious, her words careful. We're not what we were, but we're finding a new rhythm, one conversation at a time. The backyard is my sanctuary. I've expanded the garden, rows of zucchini and sunflowers stretching toward the sun. I spend evenings there, my hands in the dirt, the earth grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed. I planted a peach tree last month, its roots still fragile, but I water it daily, watching it grow. It's for my father, a quiet tribute to the man who gave me this house, this chance. I talk to him sometimes out loud when the stars are out, and it feels like he's listening. The town has softened toward me. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who once judged me, waves now when she passes. Margaret stops by every Sunday, her pie's a constant, her stories a comfort. She told me last week about my father's habit of fixing things, fences, lives, anything broken. "You're like him," she said, and I held those words close, letting them settle into the cracks of my heart. I'm not him, not yet, but I'm trying. I've started a new habit, one I didn't expect. Every night I write a letter to myself, just a few lines tucked into a box under my bed. They're not grand, just honest things. I'm proud of things, I'm scared of things I hope for. It's my way of keeping track, of reminding myself who I'm becoming. The girl who sat on that curb, suitcase in hand, is still part of me, but she's not all of me anymore. I've grown past her step by quiet step. As I sit on the porch now, the evening air warm against my skin, I watch the fireflies blink in the yard. The house behind me hums with life. Sadie's music drifting from her room, the faint scent of paint still lingering. I'm not where I thought I'd be at 18, but I'm here, rooted in a place I fought for. The peach tree sways in the breeze, its leaves catching the last light, and I breathe deep, letting the moment hold me. I'm Willow, 25 now, and as I sit in this house I fought for, I'm learning what it means to rebuild not just walls, but myself. The Ohio nights are warm now, the kind that make you want to linger outside, listening to the world breathe. I've taken to walking the neighborhood at dusk past houses lit with soft glows, families moving through their routines. It's a small ritual, these walks, but they help me see how far I've come, how the girl who lost everything is finding her way. Sadie's laughter still fills the house some days, her art piling up in corners vibrant with possibility. She's decided to study art after high school, her sketches a bridge to a future I'm proud to watch her chase. Our mother comes by more often, her visits less strained. We don't talk about the past much, but we share coffee, small stories, moments that feel like steps toward something new. I've learned to forgive her, not all at once, but in quiet choices, like leaving an extra mug out for her. Forgiveness isn't about erasing pain, it's about making room for something else. Richard is gone. His name tied to a fraud case in another town. I don't wish him ill, but I don't miss him either. His absence is a relief, like a storm passing. The town has moved on too, the whispers fading, replaced by nods and small talk. Margaret's Sunday dinners have become a tradition, her dining table crowded with neighbors who've become my chosen family. They remind me that home isn't just a place, it's the people who show up who stay. I've started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people like me, people who've been pushed out or overlooked. It's not glamorous, just paperwork and phone calls, but every time I help someone understand their rights, I feel my Father's strength in me. He gave me this house, yes, but more than that, He gave me the will to stand up, to keep going. I think about Him when I walk past the peach tree, its branches heavier now, fruit just starting to form. It's a reminder that growth takes time, patience, faith. Looking back, I see the lessons woven through the hurt. Betrayal taught me resilience, not because it was fair, but because I chose to rise above it. Home isn't just four walls, it's the strength you carry inside the choices you make to build something better. I'm not the girl who sat on that curb anymore, though she's still part of me. I'm someone who fought, who planted roots, who learned that even broken things can grow again. What's the hardest thing you fought for, the thing that made you who you are? Share it in the comments. I read every one, and your stories keep me going. If this journey spoke to you, please like and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to healing, to growing, to finding your own way home.